The weed whacker. Anyone own one?
See, I told you. We're in the city now.
We're in the city now. Wonderful. They're noisy, annoying tools by which an ordinary length of nylon filament is transformed into an instrument of ultimate power. I remember the first time I got to use one. It was my summer before college, and through pure nepotism, my dad got me a summer job on the grounds crew of the Ingalls Memorial Hospital in Harvey, Illinois, a pretty tough urban area south of Chicago. It's probably most famous for being the location of the mall that the Blues Brothers trashed in their first film.
Fun fact, I used to shop at that mall when I was a kid.
Now, a big part of my job on the grounds crew was weed whacking. And not with a little wimpy electric kind. No. We had these Hummer-sized, two-stroke monster weed whackers with a 3-inch wide shoulder strap, and I would be walking around the hospital grounds with goggles and helmet and dust mask and ear protection. I felt like a combination of Rambo and Ghostbusters when I had that thing going. There was no unwelcome plant that could stand in my way. Dandelions, gone. Plantain, history. Crabgrass, say your prayers. With the optional metal blade that I could attach to the end of my weed whacker, I could clear a vacant lot of 2-inch diameter sumac trees in an afternoon. I was Mad Max. I was Dirty Harry. I was the Terminator. I loved my weed whacker. But the downside of a monster weed whacker was that one was liable to get a little bit carried away in one's freshman enthusiasm. My second week of work, I got called into my boss's office. Hey, you know the islands in the center of parking lot B? Yes, sir. The one with the juniper bushes that were getting covered up by those nasty vines? Yeah, I took them right out. Yeah, well, those nasty vines that you took out were the morning glories that we planted last year. The juniper bushes were supposed to get dug out and removed later this summer. But now we have to replant the morning glories and put off the project for a year. I would appreciate it in the future, if you want a future, that you would get input from someone who actually knows something before you start removing plants. Do I make myself clear, hey? Yes, sir.
Which might be why you're not still in ground crew.
I'm still not on ground crew, yeah. My career was ruined right there.
Fortunately, the farm laborers in Jesus' parable don't have weed whackers.
But it would have been a much cooler parable if they had.
It would have been a much shorter parable.
That's true.
And fortunately, they're smart enough to ask the farmer what to do with these weeds that they discover in the fields. And the farmer goes out and looks and says, these are, the Greek word is zizania, which the King James translated as tares. This is often known as the parable of the wheat and the tares. Probably was a plant called bearded darnel, which often grows up in wheat fields, looks so much like wheat, in fact, that you can't really tell the difference when they're little plants. It's called a mimic weed. And so what happens is folks let it grow until the plants get mature, and when the wheat plants mature, their heads of seeds are heavy and they bend over, but the darnel seeds are light, and so it stays upright. And so the workers can go out and pull the darnel seeds out first and then go in and get the wheat. So I'm curious about the first reaction those laborers have when they go to the farmer. Their first reaction, it seems to me, is to question the competency of the farmer. Master, was that clean seed you planted? They ask. And when the master says, this is the work of an enemy that did this, their second reaction is to, well, reach for their weed whackers. Yes. Do you want us to pull them up? They ask. And the farmer says, no. If you pull the weeds, you'll uproot the wheat, the farmer says. Let them grow together until harvest time, and then I'll have the harvesters pull up the tares and put them on the fire, and we'll gather the wheat and put it in the barn. And I imagine those laborers saying, okay, you say so, and letting it be.
Even if we're not armed with a weed whacker, our reaction is not that different from the laborers in the parable. When we see something around us that's amiss, our first reaction is often to question God's competency or motives. Hello, author of creation, ineffable ground of being. I'm a mess. The world's a mess. Ukraine is a quagmire. Politics is becoming an authoritarian clown show. The climate is spiraling out of control. My church denomination is imploding. My prayer life is tepid. My cholesterol level is too high. And I would like a clearer sense of what we're supposed to be doing down here. What's the deal? That was clean seed you planted, wasn't it?
Now, we don't believe, not for a minute, that God sows weeds in our lives. I believe that the world, that we are the clean seed of God. And so our second response is often to reach for a weed whacker, to decide who's to blame and to weed them out and to pat ourselves on the back for a righteous job well done. We all have our personal list of folks that we would like to have weed whacked, not chopped down, maybe just removed, silenced, put a safe distance away. If I just make this person quiet, if we just kick this group out of our denomination, if we just defeat this political candidate, then everything will be all right, right?
Oh, I know you. I've heard you say that. So, just saying.
We've heard us say it.
We've heard us say it. If we whack the right weeds, everything will be fine, right? Well, not usually. We're so sure we see things clearly, but it's very seldom as simple as we think. We take out this bogeyman, and nothing really changes. This group leaves, and we're still a mess. Not to mention the collateral damage that we inevitably do along the way. All the other people we uproot in the process.
I believe Jesus reaches right into this mess with us and gives us these operating instructions. Let them all grow together. Let me worry about the final harvest. Much as I would sometimes like God to be in the weeding business, this parable of Jesus tells us that God is in the nurturing business. That God's grace doesn't separate things out until the harvest, when the plants are known by their fruit, not just by their foliage. To not harm the young plants, yes. And also, I believe, because in God's realm, there is always the possibility of transformation. Darnel cannot become wheat, of course. But there's always an opportunity for hearts to change. for motives to get straightened out. So it's best not to be too quick to clear the field. God doesn't call us to weed, God calls us to grow.
Now, does this mean we are never called to discern? Never called to be aware of and call out evil and injustice and that which sucks away at love and life and hope and faith? No, of course not. We are always called to look and listen and to be prophetic witnesses to love, to learn more and more, to see with the eyes of Jesus, to touch with the hands of Jesus, to prayerfully discern with the mind of Christ so that we make better decisions, live out better actions, and say yes and no to the right things. But we need to be careful and loving in our choices and in how we live them out. We need to remember that ultimately the weeding is not our job. It is God's job in the fullness of time, and we don't know when that is.
Believe that our job is to love this world. Lovely and fragile and weedy and frustrating and wonderful and as messed up as it sometimes is, because God in Jesus Christ loves this world, lovely and fragile and weedy and frustrating and wonderful and messed up as it is, and loves each of us, weedy and wonderful as our hearts are. We're called to love. In fact, I believe we can love because God in Jesus Christ first loved us. Jesus said, I give you a new commandment that you love one another. And this is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another.
If we have a vision for Harvard-Epworth, it is as a place that will be nurturing for all the folks who come in here and who don't come in here, no matter what mix of wheat or weed they are, because we are all a mix of wheat and weed. We are all wonderful mixed up bags of saint and sinner. And we're called with God to love each weedy, messed up heart that beats in each of our chests. We're called to be a place where the spiritual gifts of older folk and younger folk and men folk and women folk and non-binary folk and folk of different colors and folk of different orientations, folk of different backgrounds and experience, all of us can come to hear and live out the good news of Jesus Christ and to grow more and more into the heirs, the beloved heirs that God would have us be. If we have a vision for Harvard-Epworth, it's that we be in prayerful, active discernment for what God's will is for us, and move out into the larger community to do the same ministries of love and justice that we practice in here.
And one of the ways we nurture each other, one of the ways we nurture in this place is when we connect with each other. When we hear each other's stories, when we share our gifts, when we bear each other's burdens, when we grow relationships. And COVID has strained those relationships over these last 3 years. I believe that we're called to re-knit them together. And so we have a simple assignment for you today. For those of you who are staying for the potluck after worship in the next room, we invite...
And if you weren't aware of that happening, There's a potluck picnic in the next room after worship.
Absolutely, and everyone's invited. Well, you're sitting at table with folk. Have some conversation with each other about what's something in your life that you were sure was a weed and ended up being wheat. It could be something frivolous or light, like a couple weeks ago when our neighbor's dog got lost, and in the process of trying to find the dog, we met all sorts of neighbors we'd never met before, right? Because we were in their backyards. Or it can be serious, a health crisis that makes you more and more aware of the beauty of every day that you have. There are cards on the table to help you to remember to have this conversation. And if no one else at your table is answering that question, be brave and start the conversation.
And if you can't stay for the potluck, we invite you to tell at least one person here before you go about an event where someone that you thought was a weed or something you thought was a weed turned out to be weeds.
Or tell someone else later today. Ask them. And if you're watching online, we invite you to put a note in the chat and answer that same question. What was a weed or seemed a weed that turned out to be wheat? And find a way to give witness to God's transforming love in your life, in the field of your life.
So I hope all of this might help us remember not to be so quick to pull out what we think are weeds.
To be discerning and to be loving.
And to remember that ultimately the job of the weeding belongs to God. And our job is to help nurture the growing. Amen.